poor single dad took in a broke college student, unaware she was a millionaire's daughter. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. As Asher Kane pushed his cleaning cart down the empty corridors, it was past 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the building should have been completely vacant. But there, in the corner of the reference section, someone was still there. A young woman with long blonde hair sat hunched over a pile of textbooks, her head resting on her arms. Even from a distance, Asher could see she was fast asleep, her face pale with exhaustion. Her clothes, a faded sweater with a small hole near the elbow, and well-worn jeans told a story he recognized all too well. Asher had seen her before during his evening shifts, always in the same corner, always alone, always studying with an intensity that spoke of desperation rather than simple academic dedication. He'd noticed she never went to the cafeteria, never joined other students for meals. Tonight, tear stains on her cheeks caught the harsh library lighting.
"Miss," Asher said softly, his voice carrying more kindness than authority as he approached her table. "The library's closed." Sienna startled awake, her green eyes wide with panic. "Oh, I'm sorry, I'll leave right away." She began gathering her books with shaking hands, clearly disoriented and afraid. "Hey, slow down," Asher said, setting down his spray bottle and sitting across from her. Something about her reminded him of a cornered animal, desperate and ready to run. "Are you okay? You look like you haven't eaten in days." The question shattered whatever composure she'd been clinging to. Her shoulders began to shake and tears started flowing freely. "I'm fine," she whispered, but her voice betrayed everything. I don't have anywhere to go tonight. The shelter's full and I can't afford a hotel." Asher felt something twist in his chest. He'd been where she was, not homeless, but close enough to understand the hollow feeling of having nowhere to turn.
Without asking any further questions, he said, "Come home with me," he said quietly, surprising himself with the words. "I don't have much, but I've got a couch and some soup in the pantry. No strings attached, just a warm place to sleep and a hot meal." Sienna looked at him with such raw gratitude that Asher had to look away. "I can't accept that. I don't even know you, and you don't know me. What if I'm dangerous?" Despite everything, Asher managed a small smile. "Well, you're about half my size, and you've been living in the library for weeks reading economics textbooks. I think I can take my chances." 20 minutes later, they were walking through the dimly lit streets of Cedar Falls toward Asher's apartment building. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the quiet of two people who understood struggle without needing to explain it. "I'm Sienna," she said finally, as they climbed the stairs to his second-floor apartment. "Asher," he replied, fumbling with his keys. "And fair warning, I have a 5-year-old daughter. She's asleep, but she's curious about everything. Don't be surprised if she has 100 questions for you in the morning." Sienna's first smile of the night was small, but genuine. The apartment was tiny, just a one-bedroom place that spoke of careful budgeting and creative space management. Asher's janitor uniform hung on the back of a kitchen chair, still damp from his shift. Children's drawings covered the refrigerator, bright splashes of color in the modest space. "Bluey's room," Asher said, nodding toward the bedroom door. "I sleep out here." He gestured to the pull-out couch that had seen better years. "You can have the couch tonight. I'll take the floor." "Absolutely not," Sienna said quickly. "You're already doing more than enough." "Lady, I'm not letting you take the floor in my own apartment. We can argue about it tomorrow." As Asher heated up a can of vegetable soup, splitting it between two bowls even though it wasn't quite enough for one person, Sienna looked around the small space with something like wonder. Every corner showed evidence of a father doing his best. Homework papers organized on a makeshift desk, tiny shoes lined up neatly by the door. A bookshelf made from stacked milk crates, filled with picture books and a few worn paperbacks. "How long have you been on your own?" Asher asked, setting a bowl in front of her. Sienna wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic, grateful for something to hold on to. 6 months, she said carefully. There was a family disagreement. I chose independence over compromise. Asher nodded, understanding that some stories couldn't be told all at once. Independence is expensive. More expensive than I thought, Sienna admitted, taking a small sip of the soup and trying not to show how good it tasted after days of vending machine snacks. I had savings, but tuition, books, housing, it goes faster than you think. What are you studying? Economics and business management. She paused, then added quietly, I wanted to prove I could make it on my own. Sounds like you're doing that. Sienna let out a bitter laugh. Sleeping in libraries and accepting charity from strangers? Not exactly the success story I had in mind. Hey, asking for help isn't failure, it's survival. And there's no shame in surviving.
That night, as Sienna curled up on his couch under his only spare blanket, she stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time someone had shown her kindness without expecting anything in return. In her previous life, the one she'd walked away from 6 months ago, every gesture had come with strings attached. Every kindness had been an investment in some future return. From the kitchen, she could hear Asher moving quietly, preparing for the next day. He'd given her his dinner, his blanket, his safety, and asked for nothing but the chance to help. She thought about the mansion in Greenwich where she'd grown up, the trust fund that had been frozen the day she'd refused to marry Harrison Blackstone III, the father who'd given her an ultimatum that felt like choosing between her soul and her survival. She'd chosen her soul. Tonight, she wasn't sure if that made her brave or foolish. The next morning, Sienna woke to the sound of small feet padding across the floor and whispered voices from the kitchen. "Daddy, who's the lady on our couch?" The voice was bright and curious, belonging to someone clearly unafraid of the world. "Her name's Sienna, sweetheart. She needed a place to stay for the night." "Is she nice?" "I think so, but maybe you can help me figure that out."
Sienna smiled despite herself and sat up slowly. A little girl with dark curls and bright eyes peered around the corner at her, wearing pajamas covered in cartoon princesses. "Hi," Bluey said shyly. "I'm Bluey. Are you having breakfast with us?" "If that's okay with your dad," Sienna said, glancing toward the kitchen where Asher was flipping what looked like the world's thinnest pancakes. "It's more than okay." "Hope you like pancakes. Fair warning, they're mostly flour and hope." The three of them squeezed around a small table that was clearly meant for two, sharing pancakes that were indeed more hope than substance, but tasted better than anything Sienna had eaten in months. Bluey chattered about school, about her teacher Miss Martinez, about the picture she was drawing of a castle where princesses could be anything they wanted to be. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" "A veterinarian who's also a teacher who's also a princess," Bluey said seriously. "Daddy says I can be anything I want if I work hard enough." Sienna glanced at Asher, who was watching his daughter with such pure love that it made her chest ache. When was the last time someone had looked at her that way? When was the last time she'd felt like someone's whole world? After breakfast, as Asher got ready for work and Bluey prepared for school, Sienna started to gather her things. "Where are you going?" Bluey asked, looking concerned. "Back to the library, I think. I have studying to do." "But you don't have anywhere to sleep," Bluey said, with the devastating honesty of a 5-year-old. "Daddy, she doesn't have anywhere to sleep." Asher paused in tying his work boots. "You could stay another night, if you want, until you figure something out." Sienna felt tears threatening again. "I can't keep imposing on you." "You're not imposing," Asher said quietly. "You're just here, and that's okay." One night became 3, then a week, then longer. Sienna found a job in the college's financial aid office, minimum wage, but it was something. She insisted on contributing what she could to groceries, to utilities, to the small expenses that kept their makeshift family afloat. What amazed her most was how easily she fit into their rhythm. She walked Bluey to school when Asher had early shifts, helped with homework in the evenings, read bedtime stories with different voices for each character. She brought organization to Asher's chaotic schedule, helped him study for the night classes he was taking to become a building supervisor. More than that, she brought something neither Asher nor Bluey had realized they were missing: the feeling of being a complete family. "Miss Sienna," Bluey said one evening as Sienna helped her with a coloring project, "are you going to stay forever?" The question caught Sienna off guard. She glanced toward the kitchen where Asher was washing dishes, his back to them. "I don't know, sweetheart. Would you like me to?" "Yes," Bluey said without hesitation. "You make Daddy smile more, and you make really good grilled cheese sandwiches." That night, after Bluey was asleep, Asher and Sienna sat on the couch together, sharing a cup of tea that had to stretch between them. "She asked me if I was staying forever," Sienna said quietly. Asher was quiet for a moment. "What did you tell her?" "That I didn't know." Sienna turned to face him, studying his profile in the dim light. "What would you tell her?" "I'd tell her that I hope you do. But only if it's what you want too." Sienna felt her breath catch. In 6 months of struggling, of proving her independence, of fighting to build a life on her own terms, she hadn't expected to find this. A man who valued her presence not for what she could give him, but simply for who she was. "I've never felt more at home anywhere," she said honestly. Asher reached for her hand, threading their fingers together. "Then stay." The first time he kissed her was on a snowy evening in February. They'd been walking home from the library together. Sienna had been studying while Asher worked his shift, with Bluey skipping between them, all three sharing Asher's worn winter coat because neither Sienna's nor Bluey's was adequate for the brutal Ohio winter. Bluey had run ahead to catch snowflakes on her tongue when Sienna started laughing at something Asher had said about his supervisor's new haircut. Asher stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. "What?" she asked, still smiling. "I love you," Asher said simply, as if he were commenting on the weather. "And Bluey loves you too. We both do."
Sienna's smile faded, replaced by something deeper and more vulnerable. "Asher, You don't have to say anything back," he interrupted gently. "I just wanted you to know. You've made our lives better in every way, and I want you to understand how grateful I am that you trust us enough to share your life with us." Instead of answering with words, Sienna rose on her tiptoes and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. Bluey came running back at that moment, giggling and throwing her arms around both their legs. In that perfect instant, standing in the falling snow outside their modest apartment building, they felt like a real family, richer than any amount of money could make them. But their happiness was being watched. If you've ever wondered what real love looks like, you're about to find out. But sometimes, the past doesn't stay buried, and what was coming would test everything they'd built together. For 3 months, they lived in blissful ignorance of the storm gathering around them. Sienna had found her rhythm in the financial aid office, helping other struggling students navigate the complex world of loans and scholarships. Her intelligence shone through everything she touched. She could spot patterns in data that others missed, could explain complicated financial concepts in ways that made sense to desperate 18-year-olds facing their first real adult decisions. Asher watched her work sometimes when he came to empty the trash cans, amazed by her natural ability to command respect and trust from both students and administrators. There was something about the way she carried herself, a quiet dignity that spoke of inner strength that made him wonder sometimes about the life she'd left behind. But he never pressed for details. Everyone had secrets, had pain they weren't ready to share. What mattered was who she was with him, with Bluey, in the small apartment that had become their sanctuary. Their evenings fell into a comfortable rhythm. Dinner around their small table, Bluey chattering about school, while Asher and Sienna shared glances over her head, the kind of looks that passed between people who were falling deeper in love every day.
After Bluey went to bed, they would sit together on the couch, Sienna helping Asher with his night school coursework, or simply talking about their days, their dreams, their hopes for the future. Money was always tight, but somehow they made it work. Sienna's paycheck covered her share of groceries and utilities. Asher's wages paid the rent and Bluey's needs. Together, they were surviving in a way that felt sustainable, even hopeful. It was on a warm spring morning in April that the first crack appeared in their perfect world. Asher was returning from his shift, looking forward to the Saturday morning ritual they'd developed, Pancakes if they could afford it, toast if they couldn't, but always together around their small table. As he approached their building, he noticed a black sedan parked across the street, its windows tinted dark enough to hide whoever sat inside. He thought nothing of it until he saw it again the next day, and the day after that. "Probably someone visiting Mrs. Chen," Sienna said when he mentioned it, but her voice carried a tension that hadn't been there before. By the end of the week, Asher was sure they were being watched. The sedan changed positions but never left the neighborhood. Sometimes it was a different car entirely, a gray SUV, a dark blue minivan, but always with those tinted windows, always positioned where they could monitor the building. Sienna had started looking over her shoulder when they walked to and from the college. She'd jump at unexpected sounds, grew quiet during meals. Bluey, with the intuition that children have for adult anxiety, began clinging more tightly to both of them. "Sienna," Asher said one night after Bluey had gone to bed, "if there's something you need to tell me, something from your past that might be catching up with us, now would be a good time." She was quiet for so long that Asher thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My name isn't really Sienna Winters," she said, not meeting his eyes. "It's Sienna Ashworth. My father is Richard Ashworth." The name hit Asher like a physical blow. Even someone who didn't follow business news knew that name. Richard Ashworth, real estate mogul, one of the richest men in America. His face had been on the cover of Time magazine just last year.
"Your father is—" Asher couldn't finish the sentence. "Worth about $300 million, yes." Sienna's voice was flat, emotionless. "I walked away from all of it 6 months ago when he tried to force me into an arranged marriage. He gave me an ultimatum. Marry Harrison Blackstone and secure a business merger, or be disowned completely. I chose independence." Asher stared at her, his mind reeling. "You're telling me you gave up millions of dollars to work minimum wage in a college financial aid office?" "I gave up millions of dollars to have the right to choose my own life, to fall in love with who I wanted to fall in love with, to be valued for who I am, not what I'm worth." "And you think he's found you?" "I know he's found me." Sienna finally looked at him, and her eyes were filled with fear. "Those cars, the watching, that's his style. He's probably been planning his next move for weeks." Asher felt a cold dread settling in his stomach. What kind of next move? "I don't know," but Sienna's voice suggested she had some very specific fears. "He's not someone who accepts defeat easily, and he's not someone who cares much about collateral damage." The next morning, Asher's fears were confirmed in the worst possible way. He was walking back from his overnight shift, exhausted and looking forward to crawling into bed for a few hours before Bluey woke up, when he saw them. 3 men in expensive suits stood near the entrance to his building, looking completely out of place in the working-class neighborhood. The tallest man stepped forward as Asher approached. "Asher Kane." "Yeah, that's me. Can I help you?" "My name is Richard Ashworth. I believe you're acquainted with my daughter." "I think you have the wrong person," Asher said carefully. Richard smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "My daughter goes by Sienna Winters now, but her real name is Sienna Ashworth. And unless you want to find yourself facing charges for kidnapping and fraud, you'll cooperate with me."
"Kidnapping?" Asher's voice rose despite his efforts to stay calm. "She's not a prisoner here. She's free to leave whenever she wants." "Is she? Because from what I understand, you've isolated her, made her dependent on you, convinced her that her family doesn't love her. That sounds like manipulation to me." Asher shook his head, anger building in his chest. "You're the one who cut her off, who gave her impossible choices. I just gave her a place to sleep and something to eat. And what do you want in return?" Richard's eyes narrowed. "Money? A piece of her inheritance? Let me guess, you're planning to marry her and get your hands on her trust fund." "I want her to be happy," Asher said quietly. "That's all I've ever wanted." Richard laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "How noble, and how convenient that her happiness happens to align with your financial interests. You don't know anything about me.
I know everything about you, Mr. Kane. I know you're 3 months behind on rent, that your truck needs $800 in repairs, that you're taking night classes you can barely afford because you dream of something better. I know you're exactly the kind of man who would see my daughter as a meal ticket." Asher felt his face burning with shame and anger. Everything Richard said was true, but not in the way he meant it. "If you know so much about me, then you know I was barely surviving before Sienna came along. If I wanted her money, don't you think I would have tried to find out who she really was? Maybe you're just smarter than I gave you credit for. Playing the long game." Richard stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to convince my daughter to come home, or I'm going to make your life very difficult. I can have you fired from your job with a phone call. I can have your landlord evict you. I can make sure you never work in this town again. Are you threatening me? I'm promising you. Stay away from my daughter or face the consequences." That evening, Asher sat at their small kitchen table, staring at his hands and trying to figure out how to tell Sienna that her worst fears had come true. When she walked in from her shift at the financial aid office, her face bright with some small victory she wanted to share, Asher felt his heart break all over again. "You look terrible," she said immediately, dropping her bag and coming to his side. "What happened?"
Asher took her hands in his, noting how soft they still were despite months of hard work, how graceful despite everything she'd been through. "Your father came to see me today." The color drained from Sienna's face. "What did he want?" "You. He wants you to come home." Asher told her about the encounter, watching her face cycle through fear, anger, and finally determination. "I'm not going back," she said firmly. "I don't care what he threatens or what he promises. This is my life now, and I choose to spend it with you. Sienna, he could destroy me. He could destroy us." She cupped his face in her hands, her green eyes blazing with fierce love. "Then we'll face it together. I didn't give up everything just to run back the moment he shows up with threats." But Richard Ashworth was just getting started. Over the following weeks, the pressure mounted systematically. Asher was called into his supervisor's office for increasingly petty violations. His cleaning wasn't thorough enough. He was taking too long on his rounds. There had been complaints about his attitude. The night school program he was enrolled in suddenly couldn't find his paperwork, putting his dreams of advancement in jeopardy. Their landlord, Mr. Peterson, who had always been understanding about late rent payments, suddenly decided he needed to renovate their building and gave them 30 days' notice to find a new place. In a town like Cedar Falls, with their credit history and limited income, finding affordable housing was nearly impossible. Through it all, Asher and Sienna held on to each other and their love for Bluey. They found a cheaper apartment across town, smaller, shabbier, in a neighborhood that made Asher nervous about walking alone after dark. He picked up weekend work cleaning office buildings, coming home exhausted but determined to maintain their independence. Sienna tutored struggling students for extra money, her sessions taking place in the library where she'd once slept homeless and desperate. The irony wasn't lost on either of them, but they were too tired and stressed to appreciate it. They were surviving, but barely. The joy that had characterized their early months together was being slowly ground down by the relentless pressure of Richard Ashworth's campaign to reclaim his daughter.
It was a Tuesday afternoon, and Sienna was helping a first-generation college student understand his financial aid package when the office door opened and her father walked in. The student took one look at Richard's expensive suit and commanding presence and quickly gathered his papers, mumbling something about coming back later. "Hello, Natasha," Richard said, using her childhood nickname like a weapon. "It's Sienna now, and you need to leave. This is my workplace." "Is it? How long do you think you'll have this job once I make a phone call to the college president?" "Donald Martinez and I play golf together every Thursday. One word from me about the kind of trouble you've been causing, and you'll be unemployed by Friday." "What do you want, Dad?" "I want my daughter back. I want you to stop this ridiculous charade and come home where you belong." "This isn't a charade," Sienna said, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay calm. "This is my life. I'm happy here. Happy.
Look around the cramped office with its flickering fluorescent lights and peeling linoleum. You're working for minimum wage, living in poverty, dating a man who can barely feed his own child. This is what you call happiness? Yes, she said without hesitation, because it's mine. Every choice, every struggle, every small victory, it's all mine. I earned it. You earned the right to eat soup from a can and worry about rent money? I earned the right to fall in love with someone who values me for who I am, not what I'm worth. I earned the right to be part of a family that chose me, not one that sees me as a business asset. Richard's expression softened slightly. I love you, Natasha. Everything I've done, every decision I've made has been to protect you and provide for you. Then let me go, Sienna whispered. If you love me, let me choose my own life. I can't do that, Richard said sadly. Not when you're choosing to throw your life away on people who can't give you what you deserve. They give me what I need: love, respect, acceptance. When's the last time you asked what I wanted instead of telling me what I should want?
Richard stood up, his brief moment of vulnerability replaced by cold determination. You have 1 week to end this relationship and come home. If you don't, I'll destroy everything you think you care about here. He left without another word, but his presence lingered like smoke. Within hours, Sienna received a call from her supervisor. There had been budget cuts, and her position was being eliminated effective immediately. That night, as they sat in their new, even smaller apartment, sharing a can of soup for dinner because it was all they could afford, Sienna finally broke down completely. I can't do this to you anymore, she sobbed, her whole body shaking with the force of her emotions. He's going to keep coming after us until he destroys everything you've worked for. Maybe I should just go back. Asher pulled her close, his own eyes wet with tears he'd been holding back for weeks. Hey, look at me. We're going to figure this out. I love you, and I'm not giving up on us. Your father thinks he can buy or threaten his way to whatever he wants, but he can't buy what we have. But what do we have, really? Sienna's voice was broken, defeated. We're poor. We're struggling. We can barely afford food. What kind of life is this? Asher was quiet for a long moment, holding her while she cried, feeling the weight of all their struggles pressing down on them. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady despite the tears on his cheeks. It's our life, he said simply, and I'd rather be poor with you than rich without you. From her bedroom, they heard Bluey calling out. She'd had a nightmare and wanted them both to come read her a story. As they walked hand in hand to comfort the little girl who had become as much Sienna's daughter as Asher's, neither of them noticed the black sedan that had taken up position across from their new building. Richard Ashworth was preparing his final move. What happened at that dinner table will restore your faith in the power of love. But first, everything they thought they knew about family, loyalty, and what truly matters was about to be turned upside down. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Richard Ashworth stood at their apartment door, but something was different about him. Gone was the commanding presence and threatening demeanor. Instead, he looked like what he truly was, a tired, aging man who had been fighting a battle he was no longer sure he wanted to win.
Asher and Sienna exchanged glances. Bluey peeked out from behind Asher's legs, curious about the well-dressed stranger. 5 minutes, Asher said, stepping aside to let him enter. Richard looked around their tiny apartment, at the children's drawings on the refrigerator, at the textbooks stacked on milk crate shelves, at the evidence of a family making the best of very little. His expression was unreadable. I've been watching you, Asher said to Asher, his voice lacking its previous hostility. I've seen how you take care of her, how you protect her even when it costs you everything. And? Asher replied warily, positioning himself slightly in front of both Sienna and Bluey. I'm beginning to think I might have misjudged you. Richard sat down heavily in their one good chair, suddenly looking older than his 62 years old. I lost my wife when Sienna was 12. Since then, I've tried to control everything in her life because I was terrified of losing her too. But I'm losing her anyway, aren't I? Asher glanced at Sienna, who was watching her father with a mixture of hope and caution. She loves you, Asher said carefully. She's just tired of being treated like a business asset instead of a daughter. Richard nodded slowly, his hands folded in his lap. I want her to be happy. I want her to be safe. I thought that meant marrying someone from our world, someone who could provide for her the way she's accustomed to living. She doesn't need luxury to be happy, Asher said. She needs to be respected, to have her choices matter, to be loved for who she is, rather than what she's worth. And you love her for who she is? The question hung in the air between them. Asher could feel Sienna's eyes on him, could sense Bluey listening from behind his legs, and could feel the weight of everything they'd built together resting on his answer. I love her for everything she is, her intelligence, her kindness, her strength. I love how she makes terrible coffee but tries anyway. I love how she reads 3 books at once and gets the plots confused. I love her laugh, her stubbornness, and the way she sees the best in everyone even when they don't deserve it. He paused, meeting Richard's eyes directly. I love her so much that I'd let her go if I thought that would make her happier.
Richard was quiet for a long time, studying Asher with the calculating gaze of a man who'd spent his life reading people. Finally, he turned to his daughter. Is this what you want, Sienna? This life, this man? Yes, she said without hesitation, reaching for Asher's hand. I want Asher. I want our life together, whatever that looks like. Richard sighed deeply, the sound of a man surrendering a battle he'd been fighting for too long. Then I suppose I need to learn to accept that. But I have conditions. Asher tensed, expecting more ultimatums, but Richard held up a hand. Not the kind you're thinking. I want you both to come to dinner next week. I want to get to know the man my daughter loves, and I want to apologize for the threats and the pressure. I want to try to be a better father. And if you decide you still don't approve, Sienna asked, her voice cautious, then I'll have to learn to live with disappointment, said Richard sadly, because I'd rather have you in my life on your terms than not have you at all. A week later, they found themselves standing in front of a mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut that looked like something from a fairy tale. Asher wore his only suit, a second-hand outfit that had seen better days, while Sienna had borrowed a dress from a coworker. Bluey, wide-eyed and slightly overwhelmed, held tightly to both their hands. It's really big, Bluey whispered, as they approached the front door. It's just a house, Sienna said, though her own voice was tight with nervousness. The people inside are what matter. The dinner was awkward at first. The dining room, with its crystal chandeliers and original artwork, could have held their entire apartment twice over. Asher felt out of place among the fine china and sterling silver, but Richard made an effort to put them at ease, asking Bluey about school, complimenting the drawings that she'd brought to show him. As the evening progressed, Richard began to see what Sienna saw in Asher, his genuine kindness, his quick intelligence, his absolute devotion to her happiness. It was during dessert that Richard finally asked the question that had been haunting him since the day Sienna had walked out of his life. "What are your intentions with my daughter?" he said, setting down his fork and looking directly at Asher.
Asher met his gaze without flinching. I intend to love her, protect her, and support her dreams for the rest of my life, if she'll have me. That's not what I meant. Yes, it is, Asher replied, his voice steady and confident. You want to know if I'm going to marry her, if I have some grand plan for our future. The truth is, I'd marry her tomorrow if she wanted that, but only because I can't imagine my life without her, not because of who her father is or what she might inherit someday. Richard leaned back in his chair, studying the young man who had captured his daughter's heart. And if she inherits nothing, if I decide to leave everything to charity? Asher shrugged, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Then we'll keep working, keep building our life together one day at a time. We've been poor together and we've been happy. I think we can handle whatever comes next. Bluey, who had been quietly coloring on a piece of paper Richard had given her, suddenly looked up. Mr. Richard, are you Sienna's daddy? Yes, sweetheart, I am. Then why did you make her sad? Daddies aren't supposed to make their little girls cry. The question hit Richard like a physical blow. He looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw something he'd been too blind to notice before. Despite their struggles, despite the poverty and uncertainty, Sienna was glowing with happiness. Her eyes were bright, her smile genuine, her whole being radiating the contentment of someone who had found exactly where she belonged. "You're right, sweetheart," Richard said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "Daddies aren't supposed to make their little girls cry. I made a mistake." "It's okay," Bluey said generously. "My daddy makes mistakes sometimes too, but he always says sorry and gives the best hugs." Richard smiled for the first time that evening, a real smile that reached his eyes. "You know what? I think your daddy might be exactly what my daughter needs." As they prepared to leave that night, Richard walked them to the door. The black sedan that would take them back to the train station waited in the circular driveway, but for the first time in months, its presence didn't feel threatening. "Thank you," Richard said to Asher, extending his hand, "for taking care of her when I failed to, for showing her what real love looks like. Thank you for raising an incredible woman, and for giving us a chance."
Richard turned to his daughter, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'm sorry, sweetheart, for everything, for the ultimatums, for the threats, for thinking I knew what was best for you without asking what you wanted." Sienna stepped forward and hugged her father, really hugged him, for the first time since she'd walked out of his life 6 months ago. "I love you, Dad. I always have. I just needed you to love me back without conditions." "No more conditions," Richard promised. "Just love, just family." Over the following months, Richard kept his word. He didn't interfere in their relationship, didn't try to change Sienna's mind or buy Asher off with job offers or financial incentives. Instead, he slowly became part of their lives in the way that mattered, visiting their modest apartment, taking them to dinner, learning to appreciate the simple joy they found in each other's company. Gradually, he began to understand what his daughter had tried to tell him, that love wasn't something you could arrange or negotiate or purchase. It was something you had to choose every day through good times and bad. When Asher finally proposed on a snowy February evening, exactly 1 year after their first kiss, he did it with a ring he'd saved for months to buy. It wasn't the largest diamond or the most expensive setting, but it was chosen with care and given with a heart full of love. They were walking home from the library where they'd first met, Bluey skipping between them just as she had that magical night a year ago when Asher suddenly stopped walking. "Sienna," he pulled the small velvet box from his pocket. "I don't have much to offer you except my heart and my promise that I'll spend every day trying to deserve your love. Will you marry me?" Through happy tears, Sienna said yes, and as Asher slipped the ring onto her finger, Bluey cheered and threw her arms around both of them. Passers-by stopped to smile at the small family celebrating in the snow, and for a moment the whole world felt full of magic. When they called Richard to share the news, his voice was thick with emotion. "Welcome to the family, son," he said to Asher. "I couldn't have chosen better myself." The wedding was held 6 months later in the community center where Asher had started working as a building supervisor. The night classes had finally paid off with a promotion that doubled his salary and gave them real stability for the first time. The ceremony was small and simple, decorated with flowers from Richard's garden and filled with friends from their neighborhood, colleagues from their jobs, and students Sienna had helped along the way. Richard walked his daughter down the aisle, and as he placed her hand in Asher's, he whispered, "Take care of her heart. It's the most valuable thing she has." Asher squeezed Sienna's hand and smiled at his future father-in-law. "I've been taking care of it since the day we met. I'm not stopping now." At the reception, as Richard watched Asher spin Bluey around the makeshift dance floor while Sienna laughed and clapped along, Richard felt a peace he hadn't known in years. His daughter was happy, genuinely, radiantly happy, in a way that no amount of money could have purchased. As the evening wound down and the guests began to leave, Richard found himself alone with the newlyweds and Bluey, who had fallen asleep in Sienna's lap. "I have something for you," he said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. "A wedding gift." Asher and Sienna exchanged glances. "Dad, we talked about this," Sienna said firmly. "We don't want your money. We want to build our life ourselves." "It's not money," Richard said with a mysterious smile. "Open it." Inside the envelope were 3 documents: adoption papers for Bluey, making Sienna her legal mother, a deed to a small house 3 blocks from their current apartment, and a business proposal for a nonprofit organization focused on helping first-generation college students navigate higher education. "The house is yours, free and clear," Richard explained. "Nothing fancy, but it has 3 bedrooms, a yard for Bluey to play in, and it's in a good school district. The nonprofit? Well, Sienna, you have a gift for helping people understand complex financial systems. I thought you might want to use that gift on a larger scale." "Dad," Sienna whispered, tears streaming down her face as she looked at the adoption papers. "You did this?" "Bluey is your daughter in every way that matters," Richard said simply. "This just makes it official. And the house? Every family needs a home. Consider it my way of apologizing for trying to destroy the one you'd already built."
Asher was staring at the business proposal, his eyes wide. This would help hundreds of students every year. Thousands eventually, Richard corrected. With Sienna's expertise and your understanding of what it's like to struggle, I think you could change a lot of lives. "We can't accept all this," Sienna said, though her voice lacked conviction. "It's too much." "It's not charity," Richard replied. "It's an investment. In your happiness, in your future, and in the good you can do in the world. Besides," he added with a grin, "I'm a businessman. I expect a return on my investment, in the form of grandchildren, family dinners, and the occasional phone call from my daughter." 6 months later, they moved into their new home, a modest but comfortable house with a front porch where Bluey could ride her bike, and a backyard where they could have barbecues with their neighbors. The Ashworth Foundation for Educational Access opened its doors shortly after, with Sienna as director and Asher managing operations while continuing his work at the college. Their first year, they helped 47 students navigate the complex world of college financing. Their second year, that number doubled. By their third year, they had satellite offices in 5 states and helped more than 300 students achieve their dreams of higher education. But the real success was measured in smaller moments. Saturday morning pancakes around their kitchen table with Bluey chattering about her latest art project while Asher and Sienna shared coffee and plans for the day. Richard's monthly visits where he would sit on the floor playing dolls with his granddaughter or help Asher fix the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom. Family dinners where they would talk about work, school, dreams, and the future they were building together. Quiet evenings on their front porch, watching Bluey play with the neighborhood children, while Asher and Sienna planned their next initiative to help struggling students. On their second wedding anniversary, as they sat on that same front porch after putting Bluey to bed, Sienna curled up against Asher's side. "Do you ever regret it, taking in that broke college student who turned your whole life upside down?" Asher laughed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Every single day," he said. And when she looked up at him in mock outrage, he grinned. "I regret not finding you sooner." "That's terrible," Sienna said, but she was smiling. "You're terrible." "And you're stuck with me," Asher replied, pulling her closer. "Mrs. Kane." If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to remember what really matters. Love isn't about what someone can give you. It's about who they choose to be with you, in good times and bad, through poverty and prosperity, through every challenge life brings. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will restore your faith in love, hope, and the power of choosing kindness over comfort. Because sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones we choose to build, one act of love at a time.